This episode of Rick and Rick Rule the World is brought to you by Taskin, the first name in ultra-stylish, premium quality travel gear, like the exquisitely designed Taskin One expandable backpack. With 9 practical variations, the Taskin One is always the right size for wherever life takes you next. Save 30% on your next purchase when you use the promo code R&R Take 30. That's R&R Take 30 at taskinsf.com.
A lot of younger listeners might not be aware of the fact that some of our favorite properties like Star Trek and the Mission Impossible franchise, everything that they are in sci-fi and movies and whatnot, we owe to a little old redheaded lady named Lucille Ball for these shows ever existing in the first place. Yeah. It's a fascinating story.
Yeah. This was posted by somebody who goes by the handle of Acid Test 1967. And the story, I think, was a clip from another website. And it was really interesting because it's one of those things where you hear bits and pieces of it, but like it was put together really nicely. And he was talking about how in 1964, Lucille Ball was the sole owner of Desilu Studios. And that was the first ever woman-run major Hollywood studio, right?
Yeah, in 1964.
1964. So she was chairman of the board and all that. And so the people were coming in pitching stuff. And she had 2 ambitious writers come in that were, developing some stories. There was Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek and Bruce Geller with Mission Impossible. And, they kind of produced them, but then sold them to the big networks to actually replay. And so she was in talks with CBS and NBC, and I'm sure others, to try and sell these 2. And in long story short, I think Mission Impossible got picked up, but Star Trek kind of hadn't, and they were trying to figure it out. And everybody on her board of directors voted against Star Trek and said, look, let's focus on the other ones. And let's not focus on this one, which was kind of cool, right? And so that was like...
She was the one who really believed in it and said, no, let's give it a shot.
That's right. There were 3 of them. There was Star Trek, Mission Impossible, and then a Western called The Long Hunt for April Savage, which clearly didn't make it because I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
So anyways, that was 1966, and she overrode them, convinced them to do it, and then the rest is history. And if you think about it, Star Trek, it is one of the largest, creative stories ever. It spawned movies, comic books, cult fanatics.
Animation, everything.
Yeah, exactly. And we all owe that to Lucille Ball, a redheaded comedian who was basically a slapstick comedian back in the 1960s.
Yeah, for younger listeners, Lucille Ball was the star of I Love Lucy in the early 1950s with her husband, Desi Arnaz. Well, this was a interracial couple on TV. That was unheard of. In fact, CBS, they were picking it up. It was a version of a radio show that she'd been on for years. They wanted her to do a TV series, new medium, and she insisted on it being opposite her husband, who's a Cuban-American band leader. And they're like, are you crazy? And so they went around the U.S. to do shows together in the characters of Ricky and Lucy Ricardo. And audiences loved them. And so CBS, their execs went out to these shows and was like, this is great. Everybody loves them. And so they started the show, which took America by storm. People did not miss this TV show. Well, it ran for, I don't know what it was, 6 years or whatever. Their relationship was a bit rocky, and Lucille Ball ended up divorcing Desi Arnaz, and she bought him out of the studio. And so she became the first woman running what had quickly become a major U.S. studio with tons of shows on TV, which was a booming market. And she was still doing a show at the time, Rick. So she's the head of the studio, and she had a show where she's single called The Lucy Show with Vivian Vance and someone else, I think, as her sort of straight man in the show. That was running at the same time. And then another show with her kids in the late 60s.
Here's Lucy,
yeah. And so this is where she's running a studio. And so Star Trek, the pilot was shot, and the rest of her board's like, the word they used was, it's too cerebral. And she said, we should still give it a shot. So they started over. They recast some of the parts. And then, like you said, the rest is history.
Yeah.
Together, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz in particular, created what we know of as the TV sitcom. At that time, in the 1950s, things were broadcast live. Like if you were watching a show, the actors were doing it right then. They'd do a show for the East Coast and then another for the West Coast. And they wanted to be able to, do the show once. And there was a technology that recorded. All these shows were getting recorded, but it looked terrible. And so he created the whole thing around videotape and the 3-camera setup for shows. No one had done shows like this before. He just kind of said, what if we did it where it was 3 cameras and a live audience, where the audience that you hear laughing is actually laughing. Right. They invented all this stuff, including the syndication market that enabled shows like I Love Lucy and eventually Star Trek to live on and gain gain larger audiences in continuous repeats. And so amazing story. And that's just a little taste of it. But anyway, yeah, Star Trek wouldn't have happened without her.
That's true. Now, I can't remember if I've ever seen that first episode. Have you seen it, The Cage?
Oh, yes, you probably have. So what they did is, partially to save money, they did a 2-part episode where we learned that Captain Pike is on trial. So what they do is they show that episode as a flashback, which is called The Menagerie, Part 1 and Part 2. It's a good episode, works much better belonging to the universe that was ultimately created for Star Trek.
That's awesome.
Yet another reason we all should love Lucy.